Welcome to AO On Air. This is a podcast from ActiveOps, allowing us to present you topics ranging from operations management, leadership, technology, and new innovations. Check out all our episodes on YouTube channel AOTV or with your favorite podcast platforms such as Apple or Spotify. Now let's begin.
Hello and welcome to AO On Air, a podcast sponsored by ActiveOps. Today we've got a guest that's going to talk with us a little bit about managing through turbulent times. This is going to be a series of these discussions with various senior leaders, and I'm really excited to welcome Jude Pinto with us today. Jude, hello. Thank you for joining.
Hi, how are you, Michael? Pleasure to be here.
Very good. Well, why don't we start with, I mentioned that we're talking about, a senior leader's perspective in managing in turbulent times, and we can get through into more detail, but maybe an introduction of yourself might be the best way to get started.
Sure. Yeah. I come from 30 years of banking and insurance, primarily in those industries, but have had a variety of roles from finance, CFO type of roles, CIO roles and technology, strategy roles, operations role for a big part of it. And over that time, I've had the privilege to manage teams from 50 to 3,000 employees.
Yeah.
So a lot of operations supplemented with technology, in both Canada and the Caribbean as well. So a bit of an international feel to that over those years. I've most recently been running my own practice, Jude Pinto Advisory, which works on advisory boards and pre-IPO boards and public boards. And that's been keeping me busy for the last couple of years, including clients and users of ActiveOps along the way too. So I've stayed very close to the company as part of that practice.
Excellent, and we've enjoyed some of your discussions previously. I've seen sessions that you talked about operation excellence, how to prepare for that, how to get your team ready for transformations and things like that. Now we're heading into potentially turbulent times. Some talk of recession, maybe not a recession, but regardless, inflation is high. We see CPI high and things like that in different regions, and it seems to be a global phenomenon, not just a regional aspect. I'm just curious, out of that rich career that you mentioned, you've probably seen turbulent times in the past. Maybe could you give us a flavor of that?
Anybody working in one or two industries over the course of 30 years will have gone through somewhat turbulent times. I started working out of university back in 1989, and during that time, I entered the insurance industry. And the turbulence at that moment was really coming from the fact that in Canada, the major financial institution pillars were starting to combine. Banks and trust companies, and also with brokerage houses, were starting to come to the forefront. And the question was out there as to what was going to happen with insurance. So if you were running large insurance operations, a lot of uncertainty was out there as to how will the industry unfold. And our team within insurance was about 3,000 people wondering what's next. So it wasn't necessarily coming up to a recession necessarily, but a lot of uncertainty as to what's the future of the industry, what's the future of that particular company, and so on. A few years later, as the dust settled on that, dot-coms had grown to a new phenomenon and then collapsed in the early 2000s. So, a lot of parts of within banks and within financial institutions in general, we're trying to react to what do we do now? After a collapse of that, which was a growth engine for the industry for a few years, but then you have to really refocus on how do you integrate your service offering up against what the clients need and what the markets are willing to fund and finance. So after the dot-com collapse, that created another sort of mini recession for those engaged in that particular part of the world. Then came 2008 with the crash there, where we were running large operations teams and went through the cycle of how do projects change, where does funding change, how does the economic outlook and the demands on every team and an organization start to shift, and what's the role of leaders as you go through that. And that 2008 in particular for all of North America meant a heavy focus on who's got the healthiest balance sheet and how do you shore that up, and then what does that mean for your operations and how do you shift companies. A lot of mergers and acquisitions came out of that as people tried to build financial strength to come out of that. In 2013-ish or so, technology and digital form had taken the forefront. So everybody started to accelerate digital and digitization programs, a little different from what it was back in the early 2000s. But that too created a threat or a change or turbulent times for those in operations. Yeah. And that continued right till 2020, when all of that sort of came to a head with the pandemic. Yeah. Right. And then it was a question of what do you continue on the digital front? How do you react to new hybrid workforces? And all of the concerns and some opportunities that come out of shifting your business throughout the pandemic. But those are all good examples where, there's a common thread there in how do you lead people through that change? What are the things that are most important as leaders or for organizations? And I think there are learnings throughout that are indeed reusable as we think about the next post-pandemic, pre-recession or pre-economic slowdown world and what that could mean for teams. How we manage probably has very similar parameters in terms of how to think about it.
Yeah, so that leads into the next question I had for you. I mean, as a leader that you've seen quite a range of issues, whether it be the capital markets or the like you said, the .com bust, which led some people into different ways. Operations leaders are kind of staring ahead, looking at what could be choppy waters, and that could mean things like layoff. It could mean things like mergers and acquisitions. Any number of things that could impact, and I think I like what you said there. It's about leading the people through that change, whatever that change might be, or just keeping them on track, right? Just keeping them selling in the right direction. Right. So, do you have three or five just good suggestions for senior leaders that are thinking about that and looking ahead?
Absolutely. I've used this framework from an ops leadership perspective over and over again, and that definitely applies as people are readying themselves for a potential recession. First and foremost, don't lose sight of your customer-driven purpose, because it's too easy to get distracted by all of the macro things happening in the environment around you, and an organization and within that organization, an ops team can really get sidetracked if it loses what its purpose is as driven by the client or the consumer or the customer, however that's being defined. It will shift during a recession, but it should be the driver of how you think about your organization and your services and what's most important for the next 3 to 5 years. That's number one. Yeah. Number two are build agility. Your project budgets and strategic plans from 2 years ago and 5 years ago aren't going to be the same as what it's going to be in the next year. So get ready, build resilience in your team for that type of change, and be open about the fact that that's likely to impact the way things are run or need to emerge coming out of a recession. Third, redefine your definition of ops excellence. So again, what was relevant pre-pandemic, what was relevant through the pandemic aren't the same measures that might be relevant now as the business goes through a cycle of change, and people go and teams have to go through changing how their definition of performance. And last but not least, and I leave this last because I'd probably spend most time on it, it's get ready for a different form of engagement. Engagement, whether you were going through a 1995 industry change or a 2001 .com bust or a 2008 downturn or a pandemic, engagement of your employees. In the pandemic, that was driven by huge concerns around physical and mental wellness as you went through it. That expands now into economic wellness for friends and families in general, and for the economy in total as we go through this next piece. The engagement level, the requirement for leaders to be able to engage continues. Yeah. Right. Different form of factors that drive that, and different tools that need to go into that. But I'd say it's a common thread for sure, but as I've seen over 30 years, and great leaders and great organizations find how to fine tune their levels of engagement and not lose their employees along the way.
Excellent. I really like all four of those. So let's go back and start with the first one. It was really the customer, right? If you've developed a strategy for your customer-driven process or your beliefs as a company. So how do you keep people focused on that? You said don't lose sight of it, but how do you keep people focused when they may see a bit of change around them?
Yeah. I think pre-pandemic, a lot of good work had been going on in a number of companies, not just in financial services, but because of the availability of data and feedback and input from customers, product offerings and service offerings were getting to be quite refined. A keen understanding of where things needed to be digital, enhanced by face-to-face, omni-channel, expectations for turnaround times and service levels, et cetera, started to get crisper and crisper because technology started to enable a greater attraction of that, gathering of that stuff directly from the customers. So that was a healthy cycle leading up into I'd say the start of pandemic. That pandemic then came along and said, okay, wait a minute, your customers are locked up, you're locked up, your employees are partially working from home. How do you deliver that stuff? What momentum do you retain when doing that? And you can actually see now that customer-driven purpose driving a lot of what kept engagement up, even if people were working from different locations through the pandemic, but it kept them focused on it. Same thing has to happen now. Because if you turn internally and start worrying about job losses and which teams around and leaders stop communicating with employees, or it's kind of heads down, batten down the hatches, there's a danger that not only are you not going to meet your objectives of, maybe right sizing or pivoting your strategy, but you might become less relevant to your consumers and clients because you've started to ignore them.
Yeah.
So that should always continue to lead the discussion. What is happening to your customer base, whatever industry you're in?
Yeah.
How are they changing? How are their, that information gathering piece of it is as important for the executive team and the strategy guys as it is for the ops team to understand their purpose and how their purpose is changing and the importance of one metric or another in this type of recession. For example, wealth gathering might not be as active as collections activity in operations. And how do you do that driven by an understanding and empathy within a bank on how do you keep your customer franchise alive, knowing that your activities in the shape of operations type of activities is likely to change.
Yeah.
And get people talking about that. And then if you have to make changes in ops teams, there's clarity as to why, right? It's still driven ultimately by a customer defined purpose as opposed to an economic reaction, on its own.
Yeah.
So that's my thinking on the customer piece. Make sure the conversation is led by that, because in isolation, what ends up happening is a mid-level manager might say, we're being told to do this. We have to close that in that team, but grow that team without a good sense of purpose, right? So, you have to equip those leaders with a reason why this is less important, that's going to be more important, or we're starting to do this instead.
Yeah.
And hopefully there's a tie back into your business's reason for being in the first place, which is the client.
Yeah, it's interesting, and the vision that popped in my head, and this may be too simplistic of an example, but I'll say it anyway. When you think about a retail store and people are dealing with inventory, or maybe they're restocking something, and they put that bell on the front door, and when you open that front door and the bell rings, you got to go take care of the customer first, right? Yeah. And it kind of that whether that's accurate or not, it kind of popped in my head that, hey, when that bell rings, let's make sure that we're there. So. Yeah, interesting.
100%.
Yeah. So the second item you said is something that we talk about a lot at Active Ops and with our customers, but it's build agility. And you said you also used the word resilience, build resilience into your operation. So could you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So I think, what I've seen in larger operations team and technology teams and even professional services teams is, it's, when we hit a wall where we have to make a strategic pivot for economic reasons or whatever, there's a bit of going through the phases of acceptance, from anger and denial to exploration to acceptance on that. So that tends to happen around this time too, because there's you hear the negative conversations are this was what we were on track to do, we had to give it up to do this in the pandemic instead, and now we're being asked to do this. And our budgets are shifting. That no longer exists, but they want to invest here in that, right? So, and it all may be for good strategic reasons as to why we need to do that. But bringing the organization along with that strategy is the essence of what I'm thinking of in terms of agility and resilience. And it's back to that making meaning around change so that you can accept it. So what tends to happen is, number one, you got to build a case for doing a different set of projects or cutting back these project budgets and growing those ones, et cetera, and making sure that what you choose to do in the next 3 to 5 years are going to be best aligned to the economic reality and the objectives of the firm. But along the way, what also happens in this time, you've got a lot of emergency projects. This is collapsing, that's collapsing. You've got a particular, issue with a client set or part of an industry shifts and stuff, and all of a sudden you feel like you're firefighting. And being able to firefight well, recognizing that there will be these things that come up, that's resilience. Yeah. So that not everybody you're not completely shocked every time there's a slight change and someone says we need to work on this for a couple of months. Yeah. That's going to be the course of in the next 3 years. That's going to happen, and you don't want that to be the reason you lose engagement along the way. It's build that mental resilience, knowing that that's going to shape your activities and your projects, and you can bring people with you. Yeah. So starting to talk about building personal and team resilience now is a good thing. People did it well. I say that I've been associated with it throughout the start of the pandemic, because there is just this global need for everybody to get their heads around what this means to them and to their firm and their teams, and then them personally. Same sort of thing is going to happen now in this. So agility to take on new and different projects and get ready for yourself and keep people engaged, and resilience to take on the unexpected things that are going to happen in this type of environment.
Yeah, excellent. They're great points, and I like the idea that there will be emergency projects, and it shouldn't consume everybody. It's gonna, if you're agile and resilient, you'll figure out a way to manage all of that. So, and then your third item was redefine the definition of operational excellence. Yeah, I jotted it down, but I used abbreviations.
So, typically, people have a number of metrics that they think are most important to them for operations excellence, and they're going to be centered around largely service-driven metrics, productivity-driven metrics, control-driven metrics, and quality-driven metrics. Right. So, from a service perspective, things like SLAs. You've got to say, are they right sized for the size of the teams? Do you have the tools to be able to tell that you can meet SLAs successfully? Are they going to shift? Do you have, to meet shifting client-driven demands? You've got to have great tools that help you go and say, well, you know what, you're going to have to staff up here and staff down there in order to meet this type of SLA or this type of client turnaround time, et cetera. The second thing about service that tends to pop up in this environment is, employees and clients sometimes are in not the greatest frame of mind, economically and with worry and stuff around them. So service response, and by that I mean handling of exceptions and handling of things that fall through the cracks, and making clients back into fans if they do fall through the cracks. That becomes an important skill set there on the service side. So definitely adjust your staffing levels, service levels, et cetera, to better understand demands, but then also make sure you're really good at handling the exceptions, where you can easily, especially in these days of social media going viral, you can tank a lot of good work if you've just got a few clients that get really public about some misgivings. That's on the service side. On the productivity side, there's two aspects to that. There's team level productivity and individual level productivity, and hopefully tools have emerged that allow people to manage that in a positive way, meaning you're constantly increasing with better information, individual level productivity and team level productivity with greater benchmarks, assisted with tools. They should drive better processes that makes the next round of productivity targets better, et cetera, all information enabled. The downside of it would be making sure that you've got an ability to coach privately where performance is lacking. So, praise publicly and coach privately. Again, it's a layer of sophistication in managers and frontline managers, ops managers, that has to be enabled with great tools and stuff to make them able to manage productivity in a different way. So I think what will tend to happen is the tools and insights from productivity will start to get more sophisticated, and with the amount of change and resilience and agility that's required, knowing how to shift resources share resources, rebalance the organization according to the things that come with a potential recession, becomes a big driver of productivity. Because what'll happen is there'll be a fire in one place, and a team will blow its brains out because they have to somehow hire 200 extra people. But meanwhile, you don't have an ability to take resources from elsewhere, which are probably underutilized without the right tool. So productivity, again, is a tool for agility and a tool for resilience, but also a tool for engagement along the way.
Yeah, right.
And then quality. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and that kind of leads into your fourth point. I mean, I know you weren't finished with that one, but you mentioned engagement. So,
yeah, absolutely. So I think, if you've got, that these are the dynamics of managing service and managing productivities for an ops team, and it changes with the external environment. Then it comes down to the ability of the leaders, senior leaders, mid-level leaders, frontline leaders, to be able to make meaning of all of that stuff in how they lead a team, and that's engagement. Right? There's no use having all of those tools and it's just in an ivory tower. And meanwhile, things at the let's call it an operator level are just kind of doled out without that type of meaning. So you've got an existence of a hybrid workforce coming out of the pandemic, and you've got this need to manage productivity and service, and you're going to do it through your leaders. And those leaders need the tools for engagement, whether that's engaging by having daily stand-up huddles with their teams virtually, managing team level productivity. A big what tends to happen now also is that shorter term achievable targets, as things shift, become meaning. It's no use looking at your 3-year target and stuff. You should probably look at the next quarter's target and think about how you start redefining that for your particular team.
Yeah.
So I think this engagement level, constant communication, targets that actually help incent and drive performance and overall lift, as well as targets to help find underperformers and make sure that you can coach them to greater productivity. That's one level of engagement. The second piece is understanding from the data and your constant discussions, even virtually with the employees, what else is happening from a health and wellness perspective, especially from a wellness perspective. Are they with you?
Yeah.
Are they with the team? Are they staying in place and doing the bare minimum required remotely to hit some targets? And you need strategies to kind of engage and motivate the best of them. You won't get 100%, but how do you make that middle 50% better and somewhat engaged? You might have to performance manage the low end and that just incent the top end by leading example.
Yeah.
But it comes down to that engagement through communications, and communications enabled through tools and data and things that can make you as empathetic with your employee and connected with your employee as if you're on the floor beside them.
Yeah. I think that's interesting because when you think about engagement and what we've just come through with wellness being a problem because for the first time managers maybe couldn't see their employees, and it was a different set of things, but it also proved that engaged employees were more productive. So measuring that is a relatively easy data point to get when you have the tools in place. But now we're starting that wellness may shift to being concerned about being laid off. It may be concerned about making a mortgage payment. So it's still there. It just may instantiate itself in different ways, right?
That's right. Mental wellness and connectivity and engagement is still the theme, less driven by maybe medical fears and more by economic fears and fears for their family and career fears, et cetera.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's I'd say new coming out of the pandemic is you've got this bifurcated workforce, especially throughout ops. You've got still a lot of boomers getting into the retirement corridors, but you've got a lot of millennials and Gen X leaders starting to emerge. So how you train them and equip them, it's not the same way you would have done it 20 years ago for the leaders that came through the ranks and just learned every process along the way until they could lead. Yeah. So that becomes engagement of your leaders and retention of talent in this war for talent is new. Yeah. And in recessionary times, I think this will drive a lot of good, more advanced thinking for those that are thinking about making sure they're effective in this war for talent at that generation. Yeah, building for the future.
And that's something I didn't think about. That some of that generation, they haven't worked through a recession before. They haven't worked through an economic downturn before. It's the first one they're going through. So that leadership is going to be, and how you train them.
Interest rate greater than 2%.
Yeah.
They've never seen an interest rate greater than 2%.
Yeah, exactly. So you said something earlier in that response about resetting goals, where you're not looking at your 3-year goal, you're looking at maybe the next 90 days or a quarter. What does that do with the engagement? Does that excite people more because they can see, they can feel a win, a victory because they're meeting those goals faster? Or what do you have any insights on how that affects the frontline operator?
Like I think the thinking horizon at the operator and that first team leader level, for a period of stability, you could go with annual plans divided by 12, divided by 52, and you could easily get to ratchet up weekly targets. But if your business is going to go through change, such that you've got dramatic decreases in one team, increases in another team, et cetera, then you've got to get closer term. You still have to do that long-term planning, but what will make meaning for those leaders is, here's what we need to get to in the next 90 days, and focus on those things that can create achievable wins, right? Because you don't want it to be, here's a long-term focus, and then all of a sudden the team's changed its mandate and you'll never get there. That's the danger. You can't have targets that outlive the mandate of the team, right? In terms of the work they're currently doing. So shorter term wins, the senior team still doing the planning, but make sure that's translated down into something that will motivate employees and will allow leaders to have a win in how they're talking about stuff and engaging their teams.
Yeah, excellent. Well, obviously, this isn't the first downturn you've seen, as you explained early on, and you've given us 4 very good examples of how to prepare your operations, both as leaders and down to the operator level. So very, very good. Any additional insights or any parting comments you want to make about managing in the downturn?
Yeah, I think. Maybe this is also for some of the newer leaders that are coming out there. It's not, it's not about the technology and the tools and the data alone that help you manage and become strong as leaders. It's actually a different form of investing in your own leadership capabilities. And as you understand that and you build your teams of leaders accordingly, it's a time during a downturn to build that type of long-term agility and resilience in that whole generation of leaders. It's great experience for them as they go through it, and it's the time to make that type of investment for the long term.
Yeah, what a great perspective. Thank you very much, Jude. And I'd be remiss if I didn't give you an opportunity to you mentioned a little bit at the beginning about Jude Pinto Advisory. How would somebody contact you or reach you if they wanted to pick up a conversation directly?
Sure, yeah. You can find me at jude@jpintoadvisory.com. Our background is really in financial services and in tech startups, fintech startups, and then board and pre-IPO board advisory type of work. So reach out anytime. You can find our website, jpintoadvisory.com, read more about us there, and look forward to hearing from anyone.
Excellent. Thank you, Jude. And for those of you watching or listening on a podcast, thank you very much for joining AO on Air. We enjoyed this conversation with Jude. We do want to mention that we have a Capacity 2022, which is our annual users conference coming up in London on October 12th and in Melbourne, Australia on October 24th. We're going to talk with hopefully with Jude and other senior leaders about these topics and talking about how operations leaders can prepare themselves for this future turbulent times. So if you would like to learn more about ActiveOps and how our solutions can support you during this time as well, go to activeops.com. You can go to our resource hub, or you can look through our different products, use cases, etc. It's all there on activeops.com. So thank you very much for joining and have a great day.
At ActiveOps, we call it Management Process Automation, or MPA. MPA helps managers make better decisions by providing a consistent, easy-to-understand view of capacity and productivity. MPA does the hard work of consolidating information, forecasting and planning, and even gives you visibility of skills and capabilities across your enterprise. Your managers can make decisions based on a complete picture of their operations and then get back to leading. As work progresses, MPA helps managers spot problems early and deal with them proactively, celebrate successes properly, and match resource to workload in real time. By making managers more effective, MPA reduces operational costs. Best of all, the right MPA tools make it possible to deliver all these benefits across global enterprises with thousands of employees. Solutions like Workwear Plus from ActiveOps. Workwear Plus builds on our 20 years of experience supporting service operations to give you a 360-degree view of your operations, helping you turn operations management from a guessing game into a game-changing source of efficiency and value. Employees are empowered to manage their days and weeks feeling accomplished, confident, and able to balance work and personal life. Wherever your organisation or customers live and work, ActiveOps is ready to help you deliver world-class service and employee engagement to help your company thrive. ActiveOps. See further, know more, move faster.